I am Shanna Reed, and I am the co-owner of Heritage Financial Strategies. And we're back today with Jean Pomeroy from Coldwell Banker. Jean is also one of my closest and dearest friends. And there's been some big news with the National Association of Realtors Settlement Agreement. Jean, what does this mean?
Well, thank you for having me on today. And I'm really happy to be able to talk about this because there's a lot of confusion. So, what has changed has to do with how the National Association of Realtors started back in 1914. So, when the National Association Association of Realtors referred to as the NAR was formed, the way it worked is that you had an agent that worked for the seller and you had an agent that worked with the buyer, but they didn't represent the buyer. At the beginning, everybody represented the seller. So for myself, I worked for Coldwell Banker. And if I was working with a buyer showing a house, whoever that agent was that had listed the house, I actually worked for that brokerage for them. I was a sub agent for them. And that went on for a lot of years until in the early 90s. Buyers were like, wait a minute, you mean this person that's showing me property doesn't represent me? They represent the person I'm negotiating against? This is crazy. I want my own representation. And that just made sense. So in the early 90s, it was separated out. So now you had seller representation and buyer representation. And that was great. But the one thing that didn't change at that time was that the seller was paying the compensation for both the seller's agent and for the buyer's agent. And when it got split, the compensation didn't change. So the seller was still paying for the buyer's agent's compensation. And that has gone on all this time, 30 some years later. And finally, there was a lawsuit. There were two actually. And one of them was a seller that said, hey, I wasn't told that it was an option to pay the buyer's agent. I was told as a seller that I had to pay for my agent and my representation and for the buyer's agent. And that's never been the truth. It's always been an option. However, was it kind of the standard of how things were done? Yes, because you wanted to bring buyers in and you wanted the buyer's agent to be compensated to bring them to your house. So it's just how it was done. It was never something that was mandatory. But there are agents that are better than others. And obviously, someone that didn't do their job ended up having the company sued and they won. In addition, there was another lawsuit where the seller said, why should I have to pay to hire someone that's going to negotiate against me? I mean, it really just flipped around, right? Isn't it
Yeah.
exactly the way that sellers felt, buyers felt before? Now the sellers are on that end of it. And so what's happened now is because of these lawsuits, is that it is much more transparent who is paying for what. And the way that this shook out is that the National Association of Realtors are now under the fact that everybody has to have a buyer broker agreement before they can show a house. Now, there are exceptions to this, and one of these is open houses. So it doesn't mean you can't go to an open house, okay? Let me make that clear.
Sure.
But in order for an agent, and this is all across the United States, this is not just Arizona. All the states have to comply by August 17th. Arizona changed theirs on August 1st. So now, in order to have a real estate agent show you properties and, very frankly, do the myriad of things that are involved in taking care of you and representing you, you will sign an agreement stating that you are working with this agent and what their fee is for you to work with them. So that agent will let you know what their fee is, and you can choose to work with them or not. And then you go out and look at properties. And so things have changed in the respect that we used to know what the seller was providing to the buyer's agent in the form of compensation. And now that is not listed anywhere in the MLS.
Wow.
So the buyer needs to decide, A, are they paying that compensation? And if they want to use an agent that knows what they're doing, they're going to pay the compensation, as you do with a lawyer or with a doctor or any professional that you hire.
Yep.
And there's a chance that the seller may still pay the compensation for the buyer's agent, and the buyer won't have to pay it. It just depends on the circumstance.
Got it. So for example, if I hire you to help me find a house and you and I agree to a level of compensation, is that typically a percentage of the sales price, a flat fee, some combination of those? How does that work?
We are all independent contractors. We may hang our license with a company. I hang my license with Coldwell Banker,
Mhm.
but I'm an independent contractor. I run my own business. So
Okay.
there is no answer to that. There's no flat fee, there's no set fee. It's all negotiable. It depends on what that agent charges for their service. And I can tell you flat out that I charge 3% for my service. I'm a
Yep.
26-year broker, and I do a whole lot more than open a door for people and in a half an hour consultation, I explain what I do for my clients and why I keep them out of litigation and why I'm able to negotiate well for them. And frankly, most times be able to negotiate that compensation based on the house that they're purchasing and the deal that we put together with the seller. So
Yeah.
there isn't anything set, and it depends on what level of service you choose to have.
Okay. And so there are different agencies, different brokers, even within those agencies that can charge different things.
Absolutely. And again, the whole point of the lawsuit is it's all negotiable.
Hmm.
Now, again, it depends. If you want to work with me, then it's 3%. If you don't want to pay 3%, then you will work with someone else. However, right now is a good time to buy because this transition, it's going to take a couple of years for this
Hmm.
to work its way through. And for sellers, is it in their best interest to pay at least part of the buyer's agent's compensation to bring people to their house as things have slowed down a little bit? Heck yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
the where this really hits, let me bottom line it if I may, Shanna.
Sure. Absolutely.
This isn't going to change anything for anybody because that compensation that the sellers were paying to the buyer's agent, that's built into the price. Don't
Hmm.
think it wasn't.
Right.
So if they're not going to pay compensation to the buyer's agent and the buyer is going to have to pay that, the price is going to be lower. It's all a part of the way that things always were. It's just going to even itself out. However, if it's a first time home buyer, let's say, or somebody that's got a situation where they're having financial hardship but still want to be able to get into a house, then maybe they really can't afford to pay the buyer's compensation and don't want to be in a position where they don't have somebody fully representing them. Then the buyer's agent can work with the buyer to say, okay, if my compensation is 3% and you say you can afford 1%, then do you want me to show you houses that only have 2% coming from the seller to make up that difference? So if they're not going to pay 2% of the 3% that's my compensation, do you want me to exclude showing you that house? And that has to be in writing. And that's the buyer's choice.
Right.
In addition to that, the lending community and everyone has had to kind of regroup on how this is going to work. And it's now something that can be included in seller concessions to the buyer.
Mm.
So it used to be that the seller could contribute towards closing costs and prepaids for the buyer to be able to get into the house. Well, now one of the things that they can contribute to, as long as it's considered a concession, is the buyer's a broker's compensation. So there's multiple ways if somebody can't afford that for us to be able to help them. But the truth is that's a really small percentage of people that purchase because those people are normally just paying it within the price, or they
Right.
won't pay it within the price. They'll be paying it separately now. So is it really that much of a big deal? Does it really affect people's bottom lines that much? Not really.
No.
First time home buyers are the ones that need to really make sure they're working with somebody that can negotiate that for them.
No, that totally makes sense. And you brought up a good point that I want to make sure we touch on again, and that is, I think what I hear most often, or what I will hear most often from clients as we're talking about this is, well, if I don't sign that agreement, won't I save some money on the sales price? That is not true.
Well, let me say this, that if you're working with a competent agent, that is not true,
Yeah.
because that agent is going to be doing a whole lot of things to help you get the best deal that you can. And that includes everything from actually knowing how to comp a house. I actually had a cross sale recently where the other agent, I had to teach her how to comp like she was a mentee of mine, because a lot of agents are out there running rogue, and I'm going to say it just because it is the truth. If you're working with somebody that's competent, then they're going to be able to negotiate a good deal for you. If you try to do it without an agent, then you better have your lawyer ready, because there is so much that you can't possibly know about things that are going on in houses, in neighborhoods. I have all of my clients, right after they sign the buyer broker agreement with me, sign a form stating that they understand that there's really rampant wire transfer fraud. And if you have to wire in your down payment and somebody calls you and says, "Hi, I'm calling from the title company. Here's the routing number, send it in." That's probably not the title company, because that's not how they contact you. But if you're running rogue, how would you know this? So these are reasons that, boy, no matter what, you need to work, especially now with an agent, so that you're represented properly and that you're going into an investment position that's maybe one of the biggest that you have in your life, and you're not putting yourself at a disadvantage or in line for pending litigation.
Yeah, for sure. So, if I'm hearing you correctly, what will really change from a buyer or seller's perspective is just stronger disclosures, and maybe making sure that the agents that are working with both buyers and sellers are accurately communicating really whose best interest they're protecting. Is that what I'm hearing?
Well, that's part of it, because it means when you sign an agreement with a broker that's going to help you with your transaction on the buy side, at that time, you're also signing, as part of that, an agency disclosure that states how representation works. So you know how you're represented. So you know what you're going to be paying for the representation. And again, it's for the agent to work with you, and what the representation will be, so that it's disclosure up front, so you completely understand. That's the whole point of this, and it's the reason that a buyer consultation, which is something that agents that have been doing this for a long time and understand, wanting to sit with their client and actually listen to what it is that they want without an agenda and just looking to perform the transaction that the buyer wants, have been doing anyway. This puts it in writing, and it actually, it does create an agreement that you're going to work together. We as agents, prior to having just a buyer consultation, just sitting down with somebody and talking, it's hours of work for me to put together everything that I need to, so that I have the information to show my client. I've done a preliminary search for them. Maybe I've done comps in an area that they're interested in. All of the things that I need to have up front, that I've started the work before we've even signed the agreement. And once they sign the agreement, the work really begins from there. And I can work with somebody for months and months, and they don't purchase a house. And if they don't purchase a house, there's no compensation. There's no compensation to me. I get paid upon producing a result. And this will make it so that buyers understand that they have a commitment to the agent that they've chosen, or they're going to end up having to pay two agents if they decide that they're going to, oh, now I'm going to go and sign an agreement with somebody else. Now you have a problem. You're choosing your agent up front. Now, clearly, if you find out that that agent wasn't the right fit for you, you go back to the brokerage and explain, and it can be terminated. And I won't go into how that goes on. But this gives everybody the understanding that, you know what, they choose me, and I have to choose them as well, because I don't work with just everybody.
Yep.
Everybody chooses, let's start this relationship. It's the same thing with a lawyer, or when you interview a doctor for the first time. It's all the same thing. Financial advisor, you're choosing to work with this person, and it's a commitment to do that.
Okay, that totally makes sense. So then if I sign this agreement with you and I decide on a Sunday that you're holding an open house someplace else that I want to go look at an open house, I can still do that. You're saying that's an exception to this rule, right?
It is. You can go to an open house, but if you have a buyer broker agreement signed, it's the first thing you should say when you walk in,
Okay.
so that that agent there understands that you are working with somebody else, that you have an agency relationship with someone else, and that pretty much means back off.
Okay, fair enough. And now what if I go to an open house, I'm driving around in my brother's neighborhood and I see a house next to his and I'm not really in the market, but I decide to go in and look. How does that situation get changed at all with this new agreement?
Any open house that you go to, you're okay as long as you disclose it right up front.
Okay.
Now, if you're saying that you just want to see one house and you're not really looking, is that what the question is?
Yeah. Let's say I'm not really in the market and I haven't signed an agreement with you, but I see
Good.
one and I want to stop in and look at it. Does that make me a client of that agent that's in that open house, or do I still get to choose?
Good question. You still get to choose.
Okay.
So going into an open house does not create any kind of agency relationship, assuming that the agent isn't giving you a lot of information and making it look like they work for you, because they work for the seller. It doesn't create any agreement whatsoever. However, if you come into that house and say, you know what, this one's too small. I see there's a 2-story down the street, and I'd really like to see that if that's bigger. Now you have to sign a form before anyone in the United States can show you that house.
That makes sense.
It has to be done to be able to get you in, so that you are disclosed.
Okay.
Now, I will tell you, in that one circumstance, because that's a good question, if it's myself sitting in that open house and you want to see the house down the street, and you really only want to see the house down the street, you're not even sure if you're going to buy, then I can have you sign a form that's for that house and that house only. And it doesn't create a relationship between us. It just allows me to show you that house. And for that house only, you would be due the compensation to my brokerage.
Okay.
And if you decided later on that you wanted to see something else, you'd have no contractual agreement with me.
Okay.
So there is that option too. Now, can I say something about open houses as well?
Absolutely.
I think because there isn't a need for a signature for an open house, I think people are like, well, I'm just going to go to open houses. I'm just going to go to a whole bunch of open houses till I find my house. Well, and if that is what you would like to do, then I wish you a lot of luck, because the reality is most houses never have an open house. If the house is a good house and it's priced right, there's no need for an open house. It sells quickly. What are the open houses typically? Not every time, but typically stale on the market. That's why there's an open house.
That's a good point.
The idea of trying to purchase a house with just going to open houses and then maybe using the agent that's representing the seller, that's really not in a buyer's best interest. In order to see everything that's on the market and make sure that they are getting a good deal and represented and being shown red flags in the house and red flags of the area and all that they need to have their own representation.
Wow, that's a great point. And we're going to leave this one there. Jean, thank you so much for being on We Make Money Fun today. And the next time you're with us, we're going to talk about that market specifically here in the Phoenix metro area and maybe what to expect over the next year or so. Sound fair?
Sounds good.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here today. And for those of you that are listening, if you would like to talk with Jean, we will put in the show notes how to reach her and connect with her. And if you'd like to talk to Heritage, go to heritagefinancialaz.com and click schedule a consultation, and we'd be happy to chat.